everybody. It is Mike Levin on Friday, August 20th, 2021. I'm 50 years old, and in a week from today, I will be 51 years old. Makes you think, doesn't it? I do not feel like I'm going on 51. I know I got the gray to prove it. However, it's not the life I'm living. It's not the job I have or the work I do. I've got a young man's job, decent in New York salary. So I'm doing pretty well for myself. Regrets? I have a few, but they're too few to mention. And I had some interesting conversations lately with Addie because she's starting to become aware of differences between herself and other people. She's been called short, she's been called looking young, and I explained to her about what is, at least in part, some of the genes she has coming down from my side, some longevity genes, some of the Jew longevity genes, and yeah, the along with that, hand in hand, and that is the forever young, baby face looking thing. However, I got into that wonderful nature-nurture conversation with her, and that genes can only really account for so much of the story. And I gave as an example the general overweightness, the problem of obesity in the United States. That is not in our genes. That's a lifestyle thing. That's a choice. My dad died of type 2 diabetes. I ain't going to. Also, the longevity youth genes, I think, mostly came down from my mother's side as well. So there is that. But it's the Homer Simpson effect. He's supposed to be 30 years old for the past 30 years. Supposed to be 30 years old. But nonetheless, that sort of look that he projects is typical expectation. It's like John Cleese's quote that he was going to become an accountant and get married and get a house in the suburbs and then commit suicide. And the American dream, funny I quote John Cleese for that, but you know, every person's house is their castle, a chicken in every pot, a car in every garage, the stuff that started with what to do with the economic excess capacity we had following World War II, when, you know, FDR, you know, first started out with a New Deal before the big war, or World War II, because the big war, I guess, is World War I, but, you know, the New Deal, the dream of the suburbs, and, you know, expansion, sprawling America, and how that easily transitioned into reality following the war, because the GI Bill, having to put all the soldiers to work coming back, and you needed something for everyone to do, and not everyone had a college education then, so there was a lot of, you know, blue-collar work that could get you one of those ticky-tacky houses in the burbs. And it was a perfectly fine formula for most people. And it was a white middle-class America, and there's a lot of nostalgia for those days. But that was all riding the World War II economic boom. That's over. We are on much more equal footing, even footing, with countries around the world who are going through similar, you know, development stages. And they can start out with newer and more modern infrastructure, you know, avoid, you know, a lot of the more expensive approaches that had to be done in the past in favor of, you know, lower environmental impact approaches. Classic example is to use cellular towers versus laying cable in the ground or lines along the roads. As soon as we have distributed electrical distribution, that'll be a real biggie, but boy, I don't want to go down that path yet. It's my firm belief that we've got economic fusion and that people are sitting on it, and that the fusion process is being booted with tiny nuclear reactors. So you got, fission booting fusion, and then you've got fusion powering all sorts of things which are game changers. And you see the sci-fi notion. We just watched Black Widow. We bought that $30 ridiculous price for the premiere showing online, premiere streaming, the one that Scarlett Johansson is suing Disney over because she didn't get a cut of that the way their contracts let them get a cut of the box office, right? So she got cheated a little bit out of the windfall of a online premiere. But you see the airplane that she was given, I don't want to do a spoiler, but at one point there's a very high-tech VTOL airplane that has clearly some sort of ion propulsion drives as its propulsion system. And I look at that and I go, that is already so old school. If the things that we know are supposed to be possible starting in the 1950s have really come to fruition in the intervening 70 years. People are like, there's no way that technology is of Earth. And I'm like, there's no way we can be as primitive as we are. If the electric light bulb could have been designed to burn out in a year, and a conspiracy keeping filament electric light bulbs substandard for 100 years is possible, think what's possible in all other aspects of life and society, so that factories get back their investment before they go obsolete. There's a lot of money that needs to be made before a next wave of technological innovation is allowed to trickle into the system, especially if it's disruptive. So, clearly, from what we're learning, technology is being held back on the public, but I don't want to go all wacky in this. It makes you think, if things are so radically changing, the changes that we're going through now with the internet and smartphones, the information age, we're already in the post-information age. We're on the verge of the era of abundance, the age of abundance, the age of excess, perhaps even the post-scarcity society, or, a post-scarcity society. Yeah, I'm saying that right. Where, the difference between the haves and the have-nots is only a matter of excess. The haves can partake in quite a bit more excess than the have-nots, who will still have, because once energy is free, you can be eating algae for the rest of your life and never go hungry. There's a lot of things that come with free energy, which there's a lot of routes to free energy. I'm keen on the whole fusion power thing because, what was in the news about the Tic Tac UFOs, but I'm also quite keen on just more efficient solar cells. There's really no reason why this has to be super science, super high tech. It can just be speaking of TikTok, Intel's term, the TikTok advancement. When you keep the pressure on yourself to do constant refinement and improvement on your technology, not letting up because of, wanting to maximize returns on, investments long term, but rather having a willingness to obsolete yourself. Every 2 or 3 years, you can advance the state of the art. Tick-tock, tick-tock. You're either on a tick cycle where an innovation gets into the process, or you're on a tock cycle where you're getting incremental exploiting of what you did on the tick cycle. So it's not without a little bit of respite and exploitation of your good work done, but it is also without the need for truly breakthrough science. And with that, we could have, highly efficient solar cells well in our lifetime, such that energy is free again, because, you know, what pays for that? The sun. The sun pays for everything. And it's just a matter of, you know, how well you can hold out your bucket to capture it. And off-gridding becomes much more realistic. And all we have to do is let go of that brainwashing of the American dream, right? The parcel of land is a big part of it. There's a lot of assumptions that I run into all the time that I look at, and, you know, I avoided those traps in life, and I roll my eyes, but I try not to be too critical. But my one venture into buying property went terribly bad after sinking $500,000 into a New York apartment. I immediately end up at war with my neighbor, and it poisons the waters. Granted, out in the burbs, when the yards are big and you have more space between each other, that kind of stuff doesn't happen quite as much, but you gotta live with your neighbors. And if it goes sour after that big investment of money, you just gotta grin and bear it. And hating your neighbors is just one example of those kinds of compromises that you're locked into, that you're cornered into by the American dream. Make you overextend yourself, make you live beyond your means, go into debt, and basically climb on the wage earner hamster wheel. Now, I haven't saved much money in my life, and I doubt I'll ever be off of the wage earner hamster wheel. However, I've invested in myself. I have a high degree of confidence that I can always produce money in almost any situation, no matter where I'm dropped, you know, barring like Armageddon, where the physical labor skills are much more valuable than the intellectual ones. But, you know, what I decided to do, you know, regrets, I've had a few. I would have liked to have been a scientist, I think, but for whatever reasons, that was not in the cards. I didn't want it bad enough, right? Ultimately, that's the reason. We're all responsible for our own fate. And we look for things that light our soul on fire, that makes our heart sing. And I found the Amiga computer, and it lit my heart on fire, lit my soul on fire, made my heart sing. And Commodore Computers, the company that made it, was right in my backyard. So I had this whole stars in my eyes vision of, you know, hooking up with that company. There's no way they were going out of business, right? And I'd be, you know, the president of the company making the future Amiga computers, and, you know, being a company person, very American dream, you know, esque. And I would be doing that at a company that was founded by a Holocaust survivor, an Auschwitz survivor. So, you know, one of my tribe, and, you know, in my backyard, on technology that was the future, you know, then. I've talked enough about why the Amiga was so astoundingly cool, but that all dried up and went away, and the investment was greatly in external things, dependencies that I was creating for myself, that were pulled away, and it left me with heartbreak, you know. And on the bright side, many of the things about the Amiga computer were based on the Unix model. Unix is fundamentally different from many other proprietary systems, especially that were out at the time, but even ones that are out today. Different from Windows, different from the way the Mac was before it became Unix-based, different from Z80 processor, CP/M, and all those other things, and of course DOS. And it was different in a way that was profoundly cool. Lots of these small little commands that could pipe input and output to each other, and it's hard to grok, right? There's one of those words from Geekdom. I think it came from Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. But to truly grok what was going on in Unix was quite difficult, and it was easier to hate than love. But I came to grok the Unix way while I used the Amiga computer, particularly Amiga DOS, ARP, the Amiga-DOS replacement package, and, you know, all the different ways it could optionally boot to a graphic desktop system, or not. And you could bypass that graphic system because it was a whole lot of overhead if, say, you were booting into a game that had a lot of, you know, resource-intensive things. You didn't want to give up those resources for an also resource-intensive graphic desktop. So I learned a lot about these efficiency things, which carried over to, like, embedded systems of today. And, you know, one thing leads to the next, and before you know it, you have this, you know, much deeper understanding of things and life around you than you realize other people do. It's, you know, very surface level magic to a lot of people. If you dropped a piece of hardware in front of someone and said, okay, stop it from starting up in the way it does and make it start up and do something you want it to do instead, they wouldn't even know where to begin. They would be at a complete loss. They wouldn't know how to, you know, interrupt the boot sequence, look for configuration options and whatever the platform provides for you. You know, it's tempting to say the BIOS, but that's old school now, and there's plenty of other ways. And each platform has its own subtly different way, but the ways that have sort of risen to the top and become the winners in this Darwinian battle of dominance have been ones that have been based on the Unix-like model. And I could do embedded systems, I could do desktop systems, I could do headless drone systems. It doesn't matter. I have a fundamental enough understanding of tech that I can just sort of pick it apart, see what's going on, and step in and take it over. Now, how do you turn that into money? Well, you're sort of opportunist about it, you know? And early in my career, I was like, well, SEO, I can organize information, I can push it around and organize it on a web server. And just merely by virtue of pushing around and organizing the bits, people find your website better. And, you know, I didn't have anything to sell. I didn't have a product, and the affiliate marketing thing had absolutely no interest to me. And actually, so many things about SEO, search engine optimization, the field I ended up in, looked and felt slimy. So I was like, the way to make this redeeming is to do it for companies that I feel good about. And, you know, try and earn a buck off of that. Maybe make some variable income like a salesperson. And I went to work for one of the Commodore Amiga spin-off companies, Scala. And while my learnings were up out the roof, my injuries, my, you know, grievances were equally up out the roof. If people don't like you, and they just secretly don't like you and are very passive-aggressive about it, and they're in positions of power, they can utterly and completely sabotage your career. And I have so many war stories from Scala about things that should have been easy that have escalated to be, you know, completely ridiculous. And I would do little demonstrations. I would say, hey, look, I'm going to try and get this done. And if people are being rational and reasonable about it, it'll go this way. And if they're not, it'll go this other way. And without fail, it would go this other way. And I would go, see, told you so. Ask them why they didn't do it this way and see if you think their answer makes sense. Or whether it's just, you know, bitter spite. And of course, projections. So whatever you complain about is what you're guilty of yourself. Bitterness and spite and all that. Letting go is hard. Letting go of all those things amigo is very, very hard. And transferring the love, right? Transitions are very important. Transitioning what makes your heart sing, sets your soul on fire, makes your soul sing, sets your heart on fire, is tough. Sometimes you feel you'll never find another love of your life. And, you know, some people never do. It's very difficult. And there's a nuanced part of that discussion. The things you fall in love with are like hardware. They are the actual details of the material thing you're interacting with, the implementation, that instance. So it was the Amiga computer with its operating system, with its custom chipsets, that I fell in love with. And it let me do all these wonderful graphics things. And instead of going into science or engineering in college, I actually started out on mechanical engineering because I wanted to be one of the people on the moon or Mars, just like Elon Musk. I'd like to die on Mars, but not on entry. And yeah, I gave that up because, you know, Calc 2, Physics 1 did me in. I was a casualty of that shaking out process that the professors intentionally do because they don't want people who, you know, aren't naturals at math or meticulous enough, pedantic enough, making bridges where people will die. Fair enough. So I switched into graphic design, which I had a natural tendency for, combined with my technical leanings. I was a wizard in graphic design class, and probably my greatest learnings was the toughening of your skin and of your hide, of not being too sensitive with your emotions, because it's very easy during critique for your classmates to kind of tear you apart, saying, oh, well, that's no good. And, you know, this is not so much a, you know, hard learning that you think you get from college as you would in engineering, all the hard sciences, as much as it is a soft learning, one of the more emotional development things. And that's really important because most of the learnings in life are of that more human nature of your emotions, controlling your emotions. You know, there's been a big movement that control is overrated, and that, you know, intuition and being in touch with your animal side is of much more value. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is a balance to be struck. Being too touchy-feely alone will always make you prisoner to circumstances in life. You won't have the capacity, the technical capacity to navigate your way according to your vision, your human free will. You have less human free will when you are too reliant on your emotions than when you can get your emotions under control, particularly anxiety, and, you know, work through things in a, you know, much more Green Arrow versus Blue Circle, Vulcan-like way. So I switched into graphic design and seemed to have superpowers with my technical abilities in graphic design. However, everything was subjective, right? Everything was good or bad, whether you could convince people it was good or bad. And the question of whether there is objective good was always in the forefront. And the end answer is yes, there is some sense of objective good, but it's the truly inspired who get there on their own. Everyone else is copying and hacks. So there's a very large tendency to shovel off mediocre schlock and celebrate it as wonderful in graphic design, in all life. And I hated that. I hungered for objective good. I hungered for things that people couldn't go, oh, could you put more air around that too? Could you tweak this a little bigger? Could you change that color a little bit? And everyone thought they were an expert in design because design is one of those more soft sciences. So you were yanked around. You were a prisoner of the very field and career you entered. And unless you became so good that everyone thought your shit smelled like roses, you were going to be yanked around. So when the internet and the web hit, more like the web, because the internet was around since I was born in like the 70s in some form or other, ARPANET, lots of cool stories there, because I was born just a few miles away from where all that action was happening. And I mentioned that in a lot of videos. I guess I draw a lot of my identity from both the fact that my age and location, you know, how old I am and where I am and where I was born, was all so closely, so close to the action on the East Coast, where it all started out originally. So it tends to seep into my psyche, and it seems only natural that over time I would come to appreciate the objectivity of, I guess, what's today called computer science. And were I to go through college again, I probably would have got into computer science, maybe a little more of a business leaning, and like make it big on some creation, and then at least have a fat bank account. But again, American dream, valuing the money in the bank. Everything external can be taken away from you, and often is. Your savings can be wiped out, you know, your house can burn down. You know, people buy insurance for this, insurance for that, but then, you know, you live in fear of, you know, all these things that you've, you know, hooked your identity on as external things going away. So it's just fear, fear, and more fear. So at 50 years old now, the things I don't have regrets for is making these realizations and finding those things that are not external, but internal. People talk about self-improvement, bettering yourself, and it's such an abstract thing. You know, people, maybe physical health, maybe getting an MBA, but I'm here to tell you, Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. Learn that API stuff, learn how commands string together and pipe data to each other and can be put into script files to do that. And how when you need more power in those script files, there's Python, and Python opens the door to lots of different palettes you can paint upon. Canvases, not palettes. Palettes are where you mix the paint, but canvases are what you paint upon. So your canvas, your artistic canvas in the case of Python, is not just the web and a tiny handful of other things as it is with JavaScript, but is, you know, every hardware platform. Python has been ported to everything. Python is the chosen language of preference to be embedded into more and more, and it is so naturally expressive. It was born as a language that was meant to be understood and easy and intuitive and obvious, and all the extra syntactic sugar, it's not even syntactic sugar, that improves stuff, all the unnecessary, you know, syntax, curly brackets for code block annotation, completely stripped out of Python, so that when you look at something you can understand it at a glance, that there's very little distraction. And I would say to people at work, and when I say it they scratch their head and they just, I don't think, understand it, is that I would have probably got out of coding and, you know, a lot of the technical endeavors had I not discovered Python. Because I was really embittered at VBScript, Visual Basic Scripting Edition, which was a Microsoft standard during those days of, I guess the days when Microsoft was fighting back hard against the Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP platform, the LAMP platform. And LAMP has all but gone away with only a few vestiges remaining. Basically, the Linux and P for Python. Sure, Facebook and WordPress are still based on PHP, but by God, have I gotten WordPress out of my life. Technical overhead. So I had a blog on WordPress for a decade, and I used different cheap web hosts for the past 5 or so years, probably quite a bit more, maybe for the entire duration. I was on HostMonster, which is part of Bluehost, really the same company, but HostMonster would let you, host unlimited domains. So for what amounted to a few $100s per year, you could just add domain after domain after domain, have as many WordPress instances as you wanted. And I was like, hey, great. But it turns out all the technical liability of all that WordPress is fatiguing, and things break, and your Google Analytics stops working because your Yoast plugin goes, obsolete or whatever, So it's this, you dedicate yourself to upgrading and maintaining the tools because you're responsible for too much of what's inside the black box. And when you're standing on the shoulders of giants and allowing parts of it to be invisible to yourself, which is what you always do, there is no technology endeavor in which you're not, on the outside of some mystery box, poking in and controlling it through some interface. It's all like that. No one burns their computers from sand, and even if they did, they wouldn't have a network. So everyone stands on the shoulders of giants, right? Ken Thompson was stealing ideas from whoever was behind Multics, who wasn't stealing it behind them. Linus Torvalds was stealing ideas from Ken Thompson, so Linux stole from Unix. And then, Guido van Rossum, who did Python, was still stealing ideas from the ABC guy who created the language, and so on along the path. And people have notions of what's going on and what they're stealing, but they pick and choose the best parts and focus on an interface to a black box. And so it's a ziggurat of black boxes with us standing on the point where we are most comfortable. And in the olden days in technology, we were forced to stand lower in that stack, closer to the implementation, being responsible for software upgrades and blah, 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 blah. So things change. Disruptive changes occur where you don't have to know what's going on in the black box. And most recently for me has been the fact that GitHub, the site that stole from Git, which, was Linus Torvalds stealing from one of the earlier revision control systems that they were using for the Linux kernel before they went excessively proprietary, started to charge. So Linus, stole the API and made Git. And then GitHub said, oh, Git is too difficult, but people need to use it anyway. And everyone needs a centralized repository, because even though, Git itself was a distributed revision control system, so it's put all your eggs in one basket and copy that basket all over the place. The distributed version control is hugely wonderful. The undo history of an entire project in every location where that project exists. Brilliant. However, one of those locations needs a special status as the repository that other people can, check stuff in and out of and collaborate. So GitHub saw that and built this, breakout success of a site that Microsoft bought because they saw how it was so important to developers all over the world. And in needing to own as many parts of the developer chain as they can, Microsoft bought GitHub, as they bought NPM, and they created VS Code because you can't buy Vim and wouldn't want to because it's too complicated, so they had to change the game. When they bought GitHub, they also got Atom, which they could have worked based on, but with all the resources of Microsoft, it was better for them to, steal from Google and their Electron engine to do web development on the desktop and make it high performance and start from scratch. So that was VS Code. So Microsoft has basically bought into all the same premises as I set out 10 years ago. Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. They bought everything except for Vim, which they built internally, even though they build it based on top of Google software development tools. It all gets very ironic. And in doing so, in focusing on the APIs and the correct black boxing, you can find a sort of timelessness. You can find a sort of ecosystem, pseudo-platform that has always been there, will forever be there, and cannot be taken away from you. Muscle memory and all, right? Your keyboard shortcuts, your, your hand movements on the keyboard. You start to be like those people in the movies who seem to be hackers and controlling things telepathically. But that's something that everyone can really achieve. And the reason it isn't achieved more often is because vendors, people trying to make money off of you, coerce and finagle you into the wrong tools. Ones that you have to keep relearning, retraining, repaying for. And even when they trick you into thinking you're not, you still are, right? So all the VS Code people are going to have a rude awakening in another 5 to 10 years. It seems like a long time, but it's going to go by like that. The web is your primary platform, and the web user interface, and the point and click, and the mouse, and text areas, and all that is going to age much quicker. It's going to show its, long teeth a lot sooner than the command line interface, the Unix terminal. The Unix/Linux terminal is that tech that has always been there, will always be there, and will never let you down because it's always there out of necessity. No matter what graphical user interfaces are superimposed on top of things, no matter what, first you boot a graphical desktop, and on the graphical desktop you boot a web user interface, a browser. Aren't they the same thing? Well, yeah, Google, Chrome OS thinks so, so there's been attempts to unify those two things. But still, in a more fundamental sense, everything about graphical user interfaces is very tied to platform du jour. What kind of screens are available, what kind of, mice, touchscreens, pointer devices, and it all comes together for, suggesting a certain way of interacting with the computer. And a whole bunch of products are made, and Christmas seasons go by, holiday seasons, and buying cycles, and all that stuff is shoved down people's throats. And, there's a lot of excitement around it. It's the shiny new penny. And that's what's going on right now with all the JavaScript frameworks, right? People are running from one JavaScript framework to the next because the web is such a powerful user interface and user experience that, oh, I thought that was stopped in front of me. It's not. Okay. So, everyone wants to build a better UI. That's where all the sexy parts are. And I'm here to say that all that muscle memory, everything you're learning, while it will assure you a good job today, you'll earn good money on it, and you could always win the proverbial jackpot, the App Store jackpot, mobile, because I should also lump a mobile into that. As much or more than anything else, mobile is tied to the platform du jours. Already you can see with Apple's Xcode, the whole Objective-C, which involved like new religion to be able to develop for the iPhone, is being replaced by Swift. Fire in motion, make people move to the new platforms under the auspices of making it easier for you, making it more powerful, newer, better frameworks that do the work for you. And those frameworks create a signature. Anything that's a framework is trying to coerce you to do things according to a conventional way, and then all the software that you produce with that looks conventional, looks like everyone else's software. The more opinionated the framework, the stronger the signature of that framework in your software, and the more rapidly dated and perishable your application's going to be. So I say Python's a framework, so isn't Python guilty of all that same stuff? Yes, but it's a framework at a slightly lower level. You remember those ziggurat of platforms, progressively smaller, and you choose the right one to stand on? it's all a matter of degree. Nuance is everything. It's differences between languages is only nuance. They all compile to ASM, the assembler, intermediary language that's, made for the platform, but nonetheless assembly is assembly. So my question is, if all languages are the same and it's only a question of nuance, why doesn't everyone program an assembler or assembly? The answer is because the language really does make a difference, and nuance is everything. Nuance is make it or break it. So when I say I might not have been a developer still were it not for Python, it's because all these other things I tried along the way have completely, made me vomit. And I couldn't stand it. It did the opposite of, make my soul sing and set my heart on fire, or vice versa. They made me never want to look at it or touch it or take it up again. And, I tried a JavaScript. I tried JavaScript before Node.js was on the scene. I tried JavaScript over and over through the years. I even know the current state of it. But when I made my efforts in earnest to get off of VBScript, Visual Basic Scripting Edition, and onto something else, and this was probably 2007, 2008 maybe. Going into 2010, I had my kid in 2010, so I knew I had to start getting in my 10 years and 10,000 hours to achieve mastery, but the question was, on what? And if it was JavaScript at the time, then it would have been on the Rhino engine, which was the Firefox Mozilla JavaScript engine, the equivalent of Google V8, but back in the day. And it wasn't terribly supported. Using it on the server was even worse. And so I put JavaScript aside, discovered Python. At the time, Google was offering all its libraries that I wanted to use in both Java and Python. So I was like, if Google's offering it in Python, Python must be a serious enough language, let me look at it. And Guillaume Perrault, my friend from France/Japan, who I met through search engine optimization, because I published a page on flat screen displays for plasma applications, and NEC Japan discovered it through, I could trace it down to the search hit. A officer of NEC was Googling and found my employer's Scala's website based on pages I published. I could see their first visit, return visits, and then the relationship developed through a message board system. I had the whole cycle as a tight loop. Oh my God, it was such a pleasure. It was end-to-end CMS, content management system, customer relationship management, search engine optimization, at a time where I could have made that my product, but I did not have whatever it took to productize and to, entrepreneurialize and all that stuff. So I just did it for that one employer, and then it poofed and went away. And within the next 10 years, everyone was figuring out that formula. Maybe not as tight of a loop of a single system, except for HubSpot. HubSpot does it as a single system pretty well. But, that's one of those things where, regrets, I have a few. I could have done all that better. But today, I know that it's, the things that I came to fall in love with as I was transitioning what I loved about the Amiga to other systems, I came to understand it really wasn't, the Amiga's particular implementation, hardware implementation, software, that needed my love, that was worthy of my love. It was the concept of loosely coupled bits of awesome that you could pop out certain bits, pop in other bits, and keep yourself modern and relevant over the long run, over the long haul. And the Amiga was so poor at that because its internal parts were tightly coupled that they had a really difficult time advancing the Amiga, especially getting to 24-bit graphics, because the Amiga used planar graphics, which were great for those scrolling platform video games, but not so great for the photorealistic Photoshop type stuff. So as the world was going to 24-bit and the, Sound Blaster cards and the Targa cards or whatever they were of the day were pushing PCs to greater and greater capabilities, the Amiga fell behind. Well, Commodore had PCs too, but they lost the commodity race. Whatever happened with cost reduction of PCs, Commodore couldn't keep pace. So while they had a few billion-dollar years there with their PC-10 and their PC-30, Commodore lost on both the proprietary Amiga front and on the open PC clone front. And then Commodore went away, and then the Amiga went away, and then everything I invested in with the Microsoft Active Server Page LAMP competitor platform, which included SQL Server. That's when I learned SQL. For the most part, went away. Of course, Microsoft SQL Server is there, but no one in their right mind would be using it for, modern free and open source work. In fact, one of my big things is to try and get SQL out of the picture altogether. It's such a large moving parts piece to have in small projects that only has light database requirements. So I'm doing a lot of SQLite stuff now, a compiled C component, one of those loosely coupled pieces of awesome that pops in and out of different systems, just like the regular expression engine. So I've transferred my love from the Amiga computer to, all things objective and timeless and loosely coupled and pervasive, the P in the pool of tech. I talk about Linux, Python, Vim, and Git a lot, but there's a handful of other little things that get thrown in there. Of course, the web browser itself and JavaScript, but the web browser and JavaScript as highly capable subsystems in the same way as I think of SQL and regex as highly capable subsystems. They're snapshots of the day. And I would not hang my hat on them for, I am 50, 60, 70, 80. Maybe I'll be working till I'm 80. With my lack of savings in my life, I might be. So I'll also look for nice little windfall ways to make money, passive income on the side. And what's the difference between passive income with me and all the other scammers out there? It's that I've got a killer set of technical skills that I can build all those things that other people only dream of. Today, for example, one of my friends, I love him, great guy, reached out to me and was like, do you know anything about cryptocurrency? And I'm like, this was in the middle of the day on business hours, on chat, and I'm like, yeah, I do not. I know nothing about cryptocurrency. Don't talk to me about it. What about the stock market? You know what? Just don't bring those topics up with me. They cause anxiety. And he's like, oh, well, why is that? And I didn't even want to answer that. But the answer is because they're all get-rich-quick schemes. Just invest systematically, look for maybe a 10% return, start at like 30 and do it for the rest of your life and you'll retire a millionaire. I neglected to do that, so I do need to look for, faster ways to make money. But the good news is the ways that I invested into myself, the ways I invested internally are going to allow me to do that, because things I visualize, I can actualize much more rapidly. And it's in great part because of the better black boxing that's going on. So the GitHub system has something called GitHub Pages, or github.io, which allows you to put just static files. In other words, no moving parts, no database in place, just text files sitting there with the .md extension for Markdown. And then it steps in and turns those into stylized HTML pages. In other words, a good-looking website with, templates and, choosing your styles, what is the name for it? Another word for template, but you know what I'm saying. you choose your look and feel, and your plain vanilla text files just automatically get marked up and stylized using that. And it's an absolute pleasure after years of multiple WordPress installations. Tech liability drops to almost nothing. There's a little bit to learn, and a good interesting point about underlying stuff. I learned that the Jekyll system, which is what converts your markdown files into fancy HTML files, is written with Ruby on Rails. I'm not even sure if it's Rails, it might just be Ruby, who knows. But, you know, this is the kind of stuff I hate. It's one of those languages I tried to take up in my transition off of VBScript. And despite its, you know, allure, it's great allure, everything's object-oriented, there's easy one-liners, your code is brief, there's a sort of a pure right way to do things, it still let me down for a number of reasons. I didn't want to be forced to think in object-oriented notation all the time, and there were no support libraries for it. Google would never give things in like, oh, here's your Java version, here's your Python version, and here's your Ruby version. It just never happened. It was amazing Google gave things in the Python version. Had they not, I would have never taken it up. And even now things have changed, right? Java is not the also always there second language. There's vestiges of it around. You'll especially find it in Google, but it's been completely supplanted by JavaScript, which is funny because JavaScript is not Java, right? Despite their name similarities, the execution context is utterly different, and the divergences continue to broaden as ECMAScript is copying ideas from all these other languages and kludging it in the way Perl did in its day. And Perl is the great camel language because, you know, it's a language designed by committee and has all these ugly curly cues and things sticking off of it. It's designed by committee. And JavaScript seems to be going that way. It's got some nice things, I gotta, you know, tell you, but every time I look at those nice things, how those, you know, new ways of doing anonymous functions work and stuff, how one has closures that work one way, you know, a variable scope that works one way, and a different technique has various, I can't keep it in my head. It's getting too much like Perl, the things we look, because I looked at Perl too as an alternative to VBScript. One of the classic P languages of the LAMP platform, P in the pool of tech. It's in most Linux versions still, so it's a logical choice to consider. But it's not where the action's at. Python is now one of the two key languages where the action's at, the other being JavaScript. So why not JavaScript? Well, there's no reason why not JavaScript except it doesn't make my heart sing. And that's an important thing. Whether you really love doing what you're doing or not is an important thing. And when I work in Python, I love the expressiveness, the ability to actualize. Okay, so that brings us back to I stripped, you know, PHP and WordPress and technical liability out of my life, of all that web hosting stuff, MikeLev.in, and it was tough to keep websites going. I'm switching them all over now to GitHub.io, or GitHub Pages as they're more frequently coming to be called. And underneath one of those ziggurat boxes that I'm standing on is, you know, it's not quite hateful. It's not hateful to me the way other languages I've encountered like Java is. And I've actually kept away from things like Elasticsearch and the one for sharding and distributed processing, Hadoop. I've kept away from both Elasticsearch and Hadoop because they're both Java-based, and you have to really become a Java person to make good use of those. And if you just wait long enough, there's like transparent implementations on Python where you don't have to use Hadoop. If you want many of the advantages of Hadoop today, you can just continue programming in Python the way you do. even without concurrent, because concurrency is one of those showstoppers as well. And just use the Dask package, and it, you know, you use a Dask version of a lot of sub packages you're using because they have to be compatible with Dask to be able to be distributed in this way. But it does the distributed processing, the sharding, in ways that you don't have to change your religion. There have been transitional steps to that. Spark is also a Java original thing, but it's got Python implementations, but I skipped over that one as well because it just didn't suit me. When Docker came onto the scene so that you could have better than virtual machines, is pretty nice, except I liked native hardware, still very easy. It didn't impress me that much because the interface to like control it all, to play the shell game, was Kubernetes, and it was also a whole lot of stuff to learn, and totally unimpressed still. I bought myself a QNAP NAS. Warning, QLocker, be very careful with your QNAP NASs. Don't open them to the internet in any way. But when I got that, I saw the implementation of Kubernetes. It's Kubernetes without Kubernetes, and you can just drop, you know, images in place, and not even Docker. You wait long enough and this stuff becomes commodity, and all the weirdness of the APIs goes away. It becomes easier. The longer you wait, the complexity that's ugly and difficult to deal with becomes more simple. So it goes from, you know, ugly complexity to, you know, to simplicity, right? That's the path. And when it reaches the right level of simplicity, that's when you step on the platform. That's when I step on the platform. I'm a user of these tools of opportunity, and I would rather wait till the time is right than to be on the bleeding edge and to rewire my head to the tools. I'd rather the tools rewire to the way I think, because then I can keep being myself. I don't have to change who I am for the tools. That's really a terrible way to live. I mean, you do it a little. I had to do it with Vim. And so let me qualify that statement. When you rewire yourself to suit a tool, make sure it's a good investment. Make sure that you're internalizing good bones. Like, your bones are internalized tools, right? Your blobular, you know, spineless self, proto-nervous system self said, I need a way to protect all this stuff. And it looked around, and it certainly found silicon, for example, one of the most abundant elements on Earth, and it said, no, I don't want to use glass crystals to protect my spine. That sounds dangerous. But metal might, let's look at the different forms of oxidized metal out there. Oh, rust, it sort of washes away. Oh, well, we'll use those tricks for hemoglobin and blood. Okay, we'll use that there. But no, wait, this other thing called calcium rusts into awesome, hard, shell-like materials. Foam, you know, foamy shells. Oh, we'll internalize that as our tools, and that becomes our bones. It protects our spinal cord. It, you know, the worm becomes fish, the fish becomes amphibian, the amphibian becomes, you know, mammal, you know, skipping through reptiles and other steps along the way. But tools get internalized from a scavenging and long sort of survival of the fittest process of, you know, making best use of the tools, making best use of the best tools, and then they become internalized. That's what you're looking for in your tech tools. You should start at about 12 years old, by the way, because if you do, then by the time you're like 28, the great 28, you put in your 10 hours. These are some magical numbers, right? I say 12 to 28, you put in your 10 years. It takes a little longer when you're a kid because you're going to explore a lot of other things. But from 18 to 28, certainly, that could have been, should have been, regrets, I've had a few, but these tools weren't even what they are today, right? So they were proto what they are today because they're timeless, right? Vim was around, right? I got Vim in probably 1992, 91, when it was first distributed on the Fred Fish disk for the Amiga computer. That's right, folks. Vim was developed by Bram Molyneux, if I got his name right, on the Amiga computer first and distributed on Fred Fish Disk, which was ye old free and open source software when it was called public domain software. And I had it, I loaded it. I was a Vim user in 1992 at the latest, 91 probably. And I didn't recognize it for what it was. I didn't even recognize all the Unix-like bits of the Amiga at the time for what they were. And it all had to settle in. It was like that bone structure stuff over time. So figuring it all out by 50 is not really unreasonable or too late. But now I'm firing on all cylinders. A sort of haze is clearing up because I've had some, you know, red herring false starts from my 40s to 50s, although I also had my kid in that time period, and she's 10-year-old now, right? So from my 40-year-old to 50-year-old, I'm 50, I had my kid at 40, she's now 10 years old. She'll be 12 soon. When I try and teach her stuff, she actually gets angry at me. So I have to dangle the carrot, I have to entice her into it. So one of the things I did, and it's not really serving this purpose yet because it's too technical of stuff, but I registered the domain name Mike at 11. Mike at 11. Mike at 11. And on that site, I will be teaching you how to have a 6-figure salary by the time you're 18. Based on your skills, not your experience. I'll try and do a few businesses with her from, you know, maybe from the time she's 12 to 18. I have the domain name Tardigrade Circus registered. I've got some ideas there as 3D printers can work at smaller and smaller scales. We combined biology and engineering, and we make little environments for tardigrades to live in that give them everything they need for the moss and lichen to grow on and to interact with, little tight ropes and stuff. I'm giving all this away, right, and ideas here on YouTube, but it's because it's all in the implementation. Truth is, you can lay everything out, put it in an envelope, send it to your enemy, and they wouldn't even be able to copy you because nuance is everything. Why didn't MySpace not become Facebook? Why did Alta Vista not become Google? It's because nuance, well, it's easy to write off, is way more important than people give it credit for. Not all languages are the same, and some languages you will take to and be able to express yourself naturally and achieve spontaneous mastery with. You see, you're trying to get the same sort of spontaneous mastery and expressiveness as a musician who is improvised music with a musician, sparring, you know, with a martial arts person, you know, free-forming with a kind of control of what you're doing as if it were not free-forming, as if it were planned, right? That's what happens when you get that 10 years or 10,000 hours of experience that Malcolm Gladwell talks about in his book Outliers. It's been very deeply meaningful to me, that book. Everything from what he talks about with culture, you know, Highlanders. You want to know what a Highlander is and how the Highlanders of the United Kingdom are different from the, you know, farmers. You know, think about what a person, you know, what a herdsperson, a flock, you know, has to do to keep their, a shepherd has to do to keep their flock safe from poachers, you know, in the highlands of the Isles, versus what a farmer has to do to keep the vermin away, right? It's totally different. You have to be a certain type of individual. I think of the Scotsman from Samurai Jack and how they actually have so much in common with the Japanese samurai. It's no coincidence that, you know, the Highlander warriors of Scotland are paired with the samurai warriors of Japan. Even this is covered in Outliers. And the experience that's required to become an expert at something, a spontaneous master of something, is covered really well in Outliers. And so is what happened with Jews in New York in the textile industry, which is exactly what my dad was, and how when that all dried up on them, and things changed. They were forced into that industry because it was the most logical place. It was the most opportunistic place for the Jewish community to continue to have a place in American society, to not be, you know, marginalized in every business. My dad could not become the NASA engineer. Talk about me switching out of mechanical engineering to graphic design. My dad would have never been able to become a NASA or an aeronautical engineer, as was his dream in those days, because they wouldn't hire Jews. So he went to Philadelphia textile industry on advice of his uncles. Beware advice from uncles. Uncles do not have your best interest in mind, okay? They think they do, and they think they know everything, but I've seen a recurring pattern of uncles who figured it out for themselves and thinks everyone else should follow their exact pattern. Now, maybe I'm projecting, right? Because whatever you complain about is what you're guilty of in yourself. And I'm prescribing a very particular path with internalizing the tools of Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. However, that's working for me, and the time is right for sharing that. So I'm going to do exactly what my uncles did and what my dad's uncles did. But I'm going to do it in a way that is highly qualified, right? If it doesn't suit your nature, don't do it. And, you know, if you do follow my path, make sure it suits your nature as you go, and, you know, change it and customize it for yourself as you go. But when it does come time to adapt yourself to a tool and to internalize it as if it's bones in your body, make sure it's one that's got a lot of life in it. And Vim does. Everything, I generalize too much, which is itself meta. But things like VS Code and every text editor that's mainstream and worth its salt has incorporated a Vim mode so that you can have the Vim muscle memory and that sort of telepathic oneness with your text editor, with text itself. The great other text editor of the text editor wars, Emacs, has a very popular Vim mode, so why not just use Emacs all the time? A certain kind of wizard really can. But it's another one of those things that defeated me again. Didn't suit my vibe. So you take something up and it either makes you go, oh, I can do this, I get this, and I can see myself doing this 10 years from now. And, you know, getting better at it, still liking it. And then you go, ick, oh my God, if I'm using this 10 years from now, I'd kill myself. So Emacs was that, because Control-Alt-Shift, you know, every key had to be hit at once. And I'm like, this is not muscle memory. This is carpal tunnel syndrome. And then I used Vim, whose one great shortcoming is its excessive use of the escape key, which is way out there on your pinky. And it's like the weird curly Q coming off of Vim. Nothing is pure, nothing is elegant. And the most impure and unelegant part of Vim is the escape key, the excessive use of the escape key. And because you can remap keys, you can use something else instead of the escape key, but then that's off the beaten track too much. And I like to stay on the beaten track so I can sit down anywhere and be instantly productive and not have to remap my mind too much. So I use the escape key. And the story is that the escape key on the early IBM keyboards was in a much more prominent location, see? They moved the escape key as keyboards modernized. And so Vim's use of the escape key was designed when keyboards were different. And thankfully, keyboards have mostly locked in place and standardized, and that's not one of the things in tech that keeps getting changed on us over and over. But it is one of those little things in Vim that you do need to live with. Instead of carpal tunnel syndrome with Emacs, you have to reach for the escape key in Vim. It's a fair trade-off. So, I'm near the end of my drive, stuck in a little bit of traffic, so I'll get a little bit of chewing the cud in here. Maybe the final salient points, because it's been an hour and 10 minutes. The tools in Vim you're internalizing, the tool Vim is internalized, is exactly like the bones I'm talking about in your body. It goes into your mind, it becomes a part of you, it becomes muscle memory, it becomes an extension of your body. Vim is very much like that. Linux is not. Linux is a bunch of little commands, each of which has its own little set of nuances and stuff you need to learn, but they're small and you don't have to do it too much. And some of them I still don't even have that much mastery on. When you want to search across a bunch of files, there's tricks you can do with find and grep that I have to keep reminding myself how to do. And I'm going to try and fix that. I'm going to try and do that with these sites. This is going to be one of the purposes of these sites that I'm launching, like Mike Levin SEO. I'm going to be, I'll do Gorilla Tech. I'll put Gorilla Tech into commission. So I've got Gorilla Tech for that kind of stuff, the tools that you internalize, or Gorilla Tech. And then I've got Mike Levin SEO, which will be for stuff in my field. I've got Mike at 11, which is going to be reaching out to my daughter, and a bunch of other stuff like that. And it's no big deal from, you know, concept to actualization to making it exist in real life has never been easier. I'm going to have these, you know, side directories with Jupyter notebooks inside of them where I do these, you know, stupid Python tricks, stupid text tricks to the .md markdown files. Like I like keeping a journal in a single text file for life. It just keeps getting longer and longer, but because of how good Vim is with memory of large files, it's never a problem or an issue. But for the Jekyll system that stylizes that into web pages, one long web page is not the right interface, user experience for people. So I'm going to chop them into smaller pages, and you'd say, why would you do that when, you know, you can just name individual files and organize them? Because that's overhead, that's technical liability. One file, up and down search in one file. One file in Vim is like the ultimate user experience for me for keeping a blog. There's no reason to do anything else. So all that file management and using the GitHub pages with the Jekyll, you know, templating system. It's not even Jekyll's templating, it's the Jekyll transformation system using the Liquid templating system, which comes from Shopify. So Jekyll borrows from Shopify, GitHub borrows from Jekyll, all down the pike. They all borrow from Pike. I forget his first name, but he was a file system guy of Linux who co-invented the Go language along with Dennis Ritchie, the creator of Unix, for Google. So Robert Pike, Pike and Ritchie, no, not Ritchie, that's Thompson. Ritchie has passed. The founder of C has passed. The creator of C has passed, although he was riffing on BCPL. So, but the creator of Unix, Ken Thompson, and the creator of the Unix file system, Pike, created the Go language for Google, which is the concurrency system language, one of those things which, while not JavaScript or Python, is still worth learning and knowing because it is key and fundamental to the easy to deploy, fast to compile, massive to scale language and systems that Google uses for all their systems, right? So they had to create their own language, and that has curly Qs in it for the original reason curly Qs were there, for fast compiling, not for convention. So if you're still in a language that uses curly braces, make sure it's for a good reason, like, you know, getting a 30-minute compile down to like 3 seconds, the way the Go language does, or you shouldn't be in the language. It's not necessary. It's extra stuff you need to look at overhead to make decisions. What indenting styles will you use for your curly braces? Just overall stupid. And anyone who's gone to Python and tried to go back to some other language knows exactly what I'm talking about. And, you know, take that overhead of that extra stupid stuff and multiply it by the entire lifetime you're going to be using your tool, and you're going to see just how much stupid you're inviting into your life because of decisions that, you know, should have been rethought in the modern age, the way they were with Python. The modern age in Python is still 30 years ago. So it's really a testament to what a perfect combination of general and specific, of how frameworky they made it. Guido's decisions were, and the ABC language was before him, because that dial was set on, if low-level language like assembly and C is on this side, and super high-level languages are on this side, not even high-level languages, super high-level frameworks are on this side that make all your decisions for you, like Ruby on Rails, or all the JavaScript frameworks. When Python was setting how frameworky it was to be, they set it at this wonderful point in the middle where it is not over-opinionated. It does not create a signature in the things you create with it, yet you stand on top of a Ziggurat platform that has all these wonderful pre-built components, things that are generally data types. So much of what I'm talking about comes down to Python's list, tuple, and dictionary. And then because of such a strong personality or presence, or let's call it signature, but it's internal in the software, it's not external to the user interface of what you build with it, because it has such strong, consistent conventions in those three data types, all the other things that are created to resemble them, like new data types, like the Pandas data frame, where you get rows and columns instead of these more list-like primitives, have extremely similar APIs to Python's primitives, and they are comfortable, and you almost know how to use them automatically. And that multiply over a lifetime, happy little surprises and rewards, and you get some idea of how different a life of coding with Python can be versus other languages. And I don't want to turn this all into a Python cheerleading session, because as I make the point over and over again, all you're doing is making another black box that people stand on the outside of, so they don't care that your stuff is Python. Just like I don't care that the stuff under the GitHub IO, GitHub pages, is actually Ruby on Rails, right? I don't care that in Endeca, I'm saying Endeca, I don't care that Elasticsearch is Java. I don't care that Hadoop is Java, but anything that I interact with that uses that underneath, I'd love the benefits, you know? Faceted search is one of the benefits of the Elasticsearch system. So you got to put aside your religion at the Linux level. Is Linux a religion? Sort of. Same religion as Unix. Loosely coupled small commands that pipe their I/O to each other and can be strung together into bigger compositions and script files. That's Linux. And that's Unix, you know. That is why script files are so much more than script files. It's one of the many reasons script files are, you know, so much more than script files. That's the fundamental thing. That's even more fundamental than all the Python stuff I'm in love with. Linux, Python, when you have to build your own components, that's in that ecosystem. Vim as the tool for doing it, so you're doing it telepathically and with muscle memory. And then, of course, Git, which I talk about least because you got to use a distributed version control system. Early on, I thought it was going to be Mercurial, the Git of the Python world, where the implementation was actually in Python, so you could do better integrations that incorporated your revision control system as a component of your package. But honestly, you can do it with Git just as well. It doesn't have to be written in the same language as your other components because Linux. And so over time, you know, Mercurial clearly lost to Git. Bitbucket, Joel Spolsky's alternative site to GitHub, which was based on Mercurial, had to incorporate Git into it, and then is not even top of mind with people anymore, even though they reversed the business model. Private repos are free, and if you want to share and collaborate, then you want to pay, then you have to pay. GitHub turned that upside down, and they were first, where if you want private repos, you have to pay. If you want to share and collaborate, it's free, right? Go figure. But anyway, Git won, and you need a distributed revision control system, even if you're not collaborating, for your own undo and making your code safe and, publishing now, pushing it around, deployment, to have a poor man's deployment strategy as well. And it itself is one of those Linuxy components. So when I say Linux, Python, Vim, and Git is just like adding one of the commands you need to learn on the Linux side, as you would, ls, cd, and optionally things like the stream editor, sed is a useful one. It's like a filter. It just is like lets you manipulate a data stream as it passes through you, like sitting on it, sniffing, changing. Awk, which is a regular expression engine to do many similar things. So sed and awk often go together as an alternative to more powerful scripting languages like Python. But once you make the decision to take up something like Python, you don't really need sed and awk too much. Maybe sed, but not so much awk. So Git is just like another one of those, but one that you can't get away from the way you can get away from awk, AWK. So I include that all the time. I talk about I guess it's a developer stack and a runtime environment, but it's kind of a generic developer stack. It's not tied to particular hardware. It's not tied to a particular platform. Same with it as a runtime engine. And of course, not all of those are part of the runtime. Vim you wouldn't use as the runtime. But if you needed to edit your text files in location in a headless, device, you could, get into BusyBox, get into Vim, and if not Vim, then VI, the original text editor created by Bill Joy. Vim is the improved, IM for improved version, or M for improved, it couples with the I, version of Vim, and then there's Neo Vim, and there's all kinds of stuff. It doesn't even have to be the particular Vim software itself, because so many things riff on the original VI from Bill Joy, which was riffing on EX, a single line editor that came before it. So that story goes on and on and on, and I'm pretty much where I need to be. So this is where I'm going to wrap up. That was a pretty good story. That flowed pretty well. I like this, another good driving video. Let me know how you like these things, and I'm trying to do more talking head videos on the computer so you can follow along with the actual coding, although I'm actually talking less lately because I feel like typing when I do it. Yeah, there you have it. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.